you don't exist. Take a perk and a talk of that shit. Money swallowed like sis. Did it perfect in the kid. Got a billion who sang on my head. Look me better put on the road I just spent. I know we got $1 million. The devil that shit ain't not cheaper than again.
Hello and welcome back, fellow anime lovers, to MangaMuse. I am delighted to have you join us once again in the world of fanfiction and fantasy. This is the first part of What If Naruto Enters Fairy Tale Verse. Special note, this fanfic is written in a masterpiece of Lanky Nathan on FANFICTIONnet. Do check and support the author too. Now smash the like, share and subscribe button for more. Also press the bell icon so that you never miss such great parts. Thanks for the introduction. Now let's dive into the world. A few weeks, maybe months earlier, Kakashi was carrying an exhausted Naruto on his back after a monumental clash between the blonde and the leader of Akatsuki, a being simply known as Pain. The deluded man had attacked the hidden village of Konoha without hesitation, announcing his decision that it was time the village felt a pain comparable to his own. In one fell swoop, the self-proclaimed god turned the whole of Konoha into a crater, killing hundreds and injuring hundreds more. That was when the unpredictable blonde on Kakashi's back had arrived and confronted him. A whole lot of seemingly impossible things then happened that the Jonin could hardly begin to describe. Such things like Naruto nearly losing himself to the Kyuubi, Hinata stepping up to Pain, the basin that once was the village being turned into a lake. Honestly, if he hadn't had it verified by several reliable resources, he wouldn't have believed it himself. He had been dead the whole time this happened though, so it was kind of understandable. Then after all that, Naruto had managed to confront the true Pain, coerce him to stop the madness, and then, somehow, the man gave back life to every single person that was killed in the assault. It was as far-fetched as you could hope to imagine, but here he was, running through the trees, as alive as he was the day before the attack. But even with all the evidence, he still couldn't quite believe it. Despite this, Kakashi wasn't one to really pick at the details when something worked as well as this had, merely opting to just go with the flow. Smiling behind his trusty mask, his eyes shifted to the side to view the blonde mop of hair resting on his shoulder. "How you holding up there, Naruto-kun?" The massive blonde shifted and a blue eye became visible. "Yeah, holding in there. I'll be right after a good sleep, Databao." Kakashi's eye twisted upward as he smiled happily at the response. "Good to hear. We're nearly back, so just hold tight." Shifting his grip, Kakashi vaulted over a branch and suddenly twisted as a kunai nearly lodged itself in his throat. His feet landed on the side of a tree trunk and he pushed off, shooting over to a large branch that was almost completely concealed by the foliage. Backing Naruto up against the trunk, Kakashi shielded his body as he withdrew a kunai from his leg holster, looking around suspiciously for the enemy. His sweat dropped when Naruto let out a soft snore behind him. Trust the boy to sleep through something like this. He had used up an incredible amount of chakra through the passing events though, so Kakashi couldn't blame him. Swinging around, the gray-haired Jonin deflected another kunai in line with his heart. Frowning, the Junin snuck a glance at Naruto. It was clear whoever it was had no interest in Naruto. It probably wasn't the Akatsuki either. Intelligence indicated that they operated in pairs. Naruto had told him that Pain's companion had taken the body away somewhere to be buried, so they were accounted for. Suddenly, Kakashi had to catch a shuriken that nearly lodged itself in his belly. Ignoring the stinging cut on his palm, he flicked his hand and sent the weapon back in the direction it came. He was rewarded with a rush of movement as a body shifted out of danger. Stealing another look down at the boy, Kakashi shook his head ruefully. This was exactly what he didn't need right now. Sighing, he lifted his headband and revealed his Sharingan, looking to finish the fight quickly. It was frustrating though, because he couldn't leave Naruto undefended in such a state. Kakashi's one red eye managed to pick up the tiniest amount of movement off to his left and quickly let off a hail of kunai. Instantly using the distraction, he bit down on his thumb, flicked his hands through some familiar seals and slapped his palm down on the branch. There was a puff of smoke and a small pug was suddenly sitting before the masked man. It raised a small paw in greeting. "Yo, Kakashi, what's doing?" Shaking his head, Kakashi pointed in the direction of Konoha. "No time. I'm currently being attacked and I need backup now. Naruto is with me and unconscious, so hurry." The small dog's eyes widened before nodding once and disappearing in a blur of motion. Silently wishing his friend safety and a swift trip, Kakashi hunkered down and waited. Whoever it was that decided to attack was now taking a breather, gathering themselves for the next round. The Jonin's eyes flickered around cautiously, taking in every single movement within viewing range. Drawing a breath, Kakashi knew another attack was due any second now. Had it been under any other situation, he would have led the attacker away from his student. Damn this guy's timing. A hand flicked 2 kunai at Kakashi, which he quickly deflected. Narrowing his eyes, Kakashi wondered what the attacker was trying to do. Thus far, all he had managed to do was waste a few kunai and shuriken. It was almost like he was stalling for something. Kakashi's eyes widened as he suddenly became aware of a sizzling sound behind him. One of the kunai had been tagged. Diving backwards, Kakashi grabbed Naruto's shirt and flung the boy away just as the tag exploded. Taking the brunt of it, Kakashi was thrown backwards as he fell through the trees, bouncing painfully off the branches that filled the forest. He bit his lip as an old dead limb crunched under his weight, the sharp wood piercing his right thigh. Finally, after that, the ninja broke through the last of the branches to land solidly on his left leg, heavily favoring his new injury. Groaning, he grabbed the wood piece and ripped it out. Blood squirted out of the hole but quickly fell back to a trickle down his leg. Thankfully, it seemed it hadn't nicked an artery. Ignoring the pain, Kakashi started running towards the direction Naruto had been blown. He had to have taken some form of damage after something like that. Being asleep meant he couldn't have tensed for the shock and probably knocked him out cold. Diving around a rock, Kakashi's eyes widened as he saw a man in an Akatsuki robe kneeling over Naruto. He cursed his luck. Of course, now had to be the one time a solo agent was around. They must have been planning this from the start. That first attack on Kakashi was all just a distraction from the man's real goal. Something weird was happening before the man too. It seemed like the very air before him was being warped for some reason. Spirals of matter twisting around in front of his face. Naruto seemed to be affected as well, as his body seemed to start dematerializing right before Kakashi's very eyes. With no time to think about it, Kakashi's Sharingan began to twist as it upgraded to the Manjikaiu stage. Widening his eye, Kakashi zeroed in on his target. Kamui, authority of the gods. Instantly, the air around the mystery man began to twist as well as Kakashi's original technique began to suck the villain into a separate dimension. Sensing the attack, the Akatsuki member dived out of harm's way, growling loudly in annoyance. Unfortunately though, this left Naruto behind as the agent's self-preservation instinct didn't involve grabbing other people. The boy fell from the suction of the first technique right into Kakashi's own. Instantly aware of the horrific accident, Kakashi nearly cut off the technique but remembered back to when he fought Deidara. He'd stopped the technique early and had successfully ripped the blonde man's entire right arm off. And with Naruto now halfway absorbed into the technique, Kakashi didn't even want to think about the end result of that. Stuck between a rock and a hard place, the Jonin had no choice but to finish the technique. His eyebrows quivered as the boy disappeared into the air, struggling not to show any emotion. He could only hope Tsunade-sama wouldn't completely decapitate him for this. He managed to take some comfort in the thought that Naruto was indeed being sent alive to another realm. Hopefully the boy would find a way to escape and get back. It didn't matter if Naruto didn't anyway because Kakashi would be sending himself off to that dimension as soon as he was done here. Finishing up, Kakashi wiped his eye as a single tear of blood trickled out of it. Turning to face the Akatsuki agent, Kakashi's gaze hardened as he saw him running away. Whoever this person was, he was guaranteed a very painful death for what he had just done. Completely blocking out the pain from his leg, Kakashi vanished in a flicker as he raced to catch up with the offender. All Naruto knew was pain. Every single cell in his entire body was screaming at him. Unending agony, the likes which he had never experienced before. If his eyes were opened, all he could see was white. Immeasurably bright, pure, painful white. If his eyes were closed, all he could then see was black. Filthy, burning, hated black. He tried to scream, but found himself unable to. It seemed that wherever he was, there was no air. Had he the presence of mind, he would have wondered how even being alive was possible. Writhing in his torture, Naruto reached out feebly, trying to touch something, anything to ease his suffering. For what seemed like hours, he reached out, unable to cry, unable to keep his eyes open, unable to keep them closed, unable to do anything. He didn't know how long he reached, but eventually something grabbed onto his hand with a suction-like grip. His hand flailed around, desperately trying to drag himself towards it. Whatever it was, it felt cool, like a waterbed mattress only 1,000 times softer. His hand seemed to fall through it as he shifted, and as it did so, sweet relief came to the limb. That single fact pierced his consciousness like a bucket of ice, and with a mammoth effort, Naruto reached out with his other hand and let himself be pulled through. Peaceful respite flooded his body as he was pulled free from the world of pain, flopping to the ground outside with a solid thump. The last thing Naruto saw before he passed out was a number of odd-looking trees surrounding him and a strong feeling of natural energy. His eyes closed, and just as darkness claimed him, a strange voice called out in the distance. "Natsu, quit stalling already. I want to get home and have a bath." "Nah, hold on a second, I smell something funny that way." But what about Macau? We really should get him home to rest. He'll be alright. Come on, let's go check this out. Happy, go on ahead would ya? Aye, sir. Voices carried through the forest easily in the afternoon light as three curiously dressed individuals veered off the road and began following the nose of the boy who had been identified as Natsu. A larger man was leaning heavily on his shoulder, looking like he had just come out of a rather brutal fight. He didn't look too much like he wanted to take this unnecessary detour either, but didn't really have a choice as he was dragged along energetically. Rounding out the three was a rather pretty young blonde girl, the type you'd expect to see in a fashion magazine and not trekking through the mountains covered in dirt. She had a pout on her face as she stomped along after her companions, trying her best to convey her displeasure through physical means. She failed spectacularly. Natsu, there's something weird just over that hill. Looking up, Natsu was greeted by a longtime friend floating in the air. A small blue cat with white fluffy wings protruding from its shoulders hovered just above them, pointing energetically over towards the anomaly. Hurry up, you might miss it. Quite literally smelling an adventure, Natsu let out a howl of excitement and charged off in a cloud of dust, leaving his female friend behind, squealing in embarrassment as she tried to stop her skirt blowing up and revealing everything underneath. Dashing over the hill, his eyes widened as he skidded to a stop. Natsu, where are you? I can't see anything cause of this stupid dust cloud you created. The girl ran from the dust, only to smack heavily into the backs of her two friends. Crying out, they all toppled forward and landed in a tangled heap. Happy floated down, looking curiously at the group as they tried to free themselves from one another. Lucy, it's not really the time for cuddles, you know. Growling, Lucy pulled her arm out of the group and glared at the cat. It's not my fault Natsu stopped so suddenly. You could have been of more use and let me know while you floated up there. Happy just shrugged and looked down at the still fallen men. I just thought you'd be fast enough to avoid them. It's not my fault if you're too fat and slow to stop in time. The girl started grinding her teeth together, glaring at the blissfully ignorant cat as she muttered death threats under her breath. Her grumbling was interrupted though when the strange occurrence caught her eye. Her eyes widened in surprise as she actually saw an arm floating in midair, looking like it was crawling from the center of a strange airborne whirlpool. Natsu, what's that? Heaving Macau off the top of him, Natsu jumped up and looked at the strange phenomenon before them. I dunno, looks like an arm. Lucy smacked the back of his head in frustration. I know that, but like, what's it doing in the middle of the air? Walking up to it, Natsu gave it a few experimental sniffs as he tried to work it out. No idea. Pretty cool, but hey. The girl shivered as the arm continued to grow rapidly from the hole. Someone's coming out. Hearing a groan, Lucy looked down at Macau who was trying to push himself over. Can you help me out here? I can't see what the thing is and I'm too weak to roll over. Pursing her lips, Lucy dug her toes into the man's side and gave him a kick, flipping him onto his back. Much better, thanks. Just then, a pain cry sounded out from the thing behind them and Lucy dived behind a large tree in fear. Natsu just continued to stare at the torso that was being spat out from the hole. In a final heave, a blonde-haired boy popped out of the air and fell flat onto his back. His eyes flickered a few times before they closed and he slipped into unconsciousness. And Natsu, Lucy, I think he heard you the first 5 times. Shut up, you useless cat. Oi Lucy, come have a look at him. Do you think he's dead? I certainly hope not. Cautiously approaching the unmoving human, Lucy looked over Natsu's shoulder. Seeing the slight rise and fall of his chest reassured her enough to walk past her friend and take a closer look. He didn't look all that unusual except for his clothing. He had a strange black and orange jacket on, along with a set of bright orange pants with a bandage wrapped around his right thigh. Actually, those strange marks on his cheeks were also a bit curious. Hesitantly reaching out, Lucy touched the mark before sharply pulling her hand back. Natsu and Happy were instantly beside her, looking in keenly. Oh, what happened when you touched him? Did he bite you? Lucy rolled her eyes and ignored them as she rubbed her fingers together. Those whisker-like marks, they're actually in his skin. Blinking owlishly, Natsu stared at the marks before taking in a huge whiff through his nose. He smells super weird. What was that, Natsu? The boy looked over his shoulder at the still incapacitated man lying several meters back. I said he smells funny. Like nothing I've ever smelt before. Really? That's rare for your nose. Think we should bring him back to the guild. A smile broke out across Natsu's face when Macau suggested the next move. Yeah, sure. Lucy, you carry this guy. I may grab Macau and we'll head back. Stiffening at the order, Lucy whipped her head around as Natsu quickly picked up his partner. Wait, what? You want me to carry this guy all the way back to the guild? Happy floated down beside her and looked at the boy. Well, he couldn't be much heavier than you. I struggle to fly when I carry you. Faking a swipe at the cat, Lucy missed and settled for shaking an angry fist at the animal. Shut your mouth. If you think he's so light, you carry him. Happy had already started floating away, ignoring the girl's protests. No, I can't, I'm just a little cat. How would I carry him? He's too big. Stomping a foot angrily, Lucy pointed at his back. You always carry around Natsu without a problem. Hearing no response, the poor blonde was left to grumble about crappy teammates and struggle to lift up the deceptively heavy boy. Oh my head. Naruto's mind slowly began to kick back into gear as consciousness started to spread over his senses. His eyes twitched as he struggled to think back over what happened. There was that fight with Pain, then Kakashi came and caught him, then sleep. It started getting fuzzy about that stage and Naruto racked his brain to try remember what happened. An explosion, then a hard landing, then someone standing over him. He remembered splitting an eye open and seeing someone in a black coat standing over him. Akatsuki, that would explain the pain that followed. But it was too fast, wasn't it? But still, did that mean he was dead? Groaning, Naruto wriggled a few fingers to try and test out the theory. There was something solid under his hands, a mattress perhaps. But why would heaven have a bed? A soft gasp off to his side made an ear twitch and Naruto tried to roll his head towards the noise. Who was that? Didn't sound like anyone he'd ever met before. Forcing all his willpower into muscle power, Naruto pulled his eyelids up and a blurry world came into view. Everything was pretty white, so it could even be the hospital. It didn't smell artificially clean enough though, so it probably wasn't. There was a hazy mound standing off to the side which Naruto assumed was a person. The mound called out in a soft voice but he couldn't make out the words. He shut his eyes and shook his head to try clear the fogginess. A wave of vertigo and nausea hit him which instantly made him stop. Very bad move. A pair of hands came to rest on his person, one on his chest and another under his head. They gently lifted him up and he felt a cup rest against his lips. Taking a test sip, he found it to be full of probably the sweetest water he had ever tasted. Quickly sinking the lot, he tried to say his thanks but his voice just growled around in his throat. Giving up for the moment, Naruto just tried to work on clearing his vision. The water granted him some form of strength which was very well received and quickly put to use. Blinking a few times, the mound he saw previously came into focus. It turned out the mound was actually a white-haired girl in a poofy maroon, full-body dress. It had a few frills around the neck which held the strapless piece up, the frills continuing down the front like he had never seen before too. She had very large, blue eyes that seemed to exude nothing but concern and peace. The delighted upturn of her lips finished off her rather inviting appearance very well. The groggy boy decided he rather liked the strange look. Looking down, he saw another girl, this time blonde with a part of her hair pulled up into a ponytail on the side of her head, holding the cup which he suspected he drank from. She also had rather large eyes, this time brown but just as inviting as the first woman's. She had a weird white and blue striped shirt on that looked like it was struggling to deal with the massive chest beneath it. She also had a rather short skirt on, but nothing Naruto hadn't seen before. Ino wore shorter. Letting his eyes drift across the room, Naruto picked up on another person in the room, this time male. Seeing his hair, he could now count all of 2 people he had ever seen that had naturally pink locks. He had a strange sleeveless black and gold trimmed, unzipped waistcoat over his shoulders with no visible shirt on underneath, and a weird scaly scarf wrapped around his neck. His lowers were covered with the remaining half of his waistcoat, the open front revealing short white trousers that were tied off at the knee with black ribbons. He seemed to be abnormally interested in Naruto too, if those wide staring eyes were anything to go by. Unconsciously creeping back into the wall behind him, Naruto cast a wary glance around. Seeing a striking red-headed woman decked out in complete torso armor, Naruto finally found the strength to push himself up. The first 2 girls reached out quickly as he sat up, hands held out to catch him in case he toppled forward. Taking another look at the warrior girl, Naruto couldn't help but raise an eyebrow. Her entire chest was hidden behind a medieval-style chest plate which sharply contrasted with the simple, mid-thigh length skirt that covered her upper legs. A pair of matching metal gauntlets covered her crossed arms up to the elbow. The entire uniform was then finished off with long, knee-high black boots that were probably a lot tougher than they looked. Her piercing brown eyes never left him, obviously gauging his potential as a threat. Groaning, Naruto held a hand to his forehead and shut his eyes again as a headache made itself known. He heard what sounded like a male voice call out, but he still couldn't make out the words. Something must have been clogging his ears. Taking a deep breath, Naruto held his hand out towards the blonde. More water, please. It took a moment, but the cup was placed back in his hand and he downed the second lot in a flash. Running his tongue over his lips, Naruto sighed happily. At that exact moment, what looked like a bald old midget decided to jump onto his bed. Crying out in surprise, Naruto backed away and the thing was quickly reprimanded by the white-haired girl. Again, he couldn't understand what was said, so he stuck a finger into his ear and wriggled it around. Popping it out, he sniffed and took another look at the man on his bed. He was definitely short and old, but still had some hair in the form of these comical tufts sticking out from the sides of his head, along with a matching white mustache that covered his upper lip. He was also dressed in a crazily colored orange and blue shirt and some blue shorts with these little gnome shoes sticking out from under him. The thing that stood out most to Naruto though was the odd hat he was wearing. It was like a brimless cap but with these two long, thin antenna things that sprouted from the top of it and fell back over his head. It was striped blue and orange and looked positively stupid. It seemed the old man knew the benefits of orange, but even that mighty color couldn't make the hat look any good. Naruto snorted and stifled a bark of laughter. What did this guy think he was? A magician? Shaking his head, Naruto looked around the group and eyed each person individually. So where am I? The room froze and looked at him with surprised eyes. Frowning, Naruto clicked his tongue and repeated himself. Oi, I asked where I am. The small man before him coughed and drew his attention. He then spoke in a typical old person's voice, the only difference being Naruto couldn't understand a single word that he said. This time, Naruto's eyes widened as he realized something. It wasn't his ears that were wrong, it was just that they were speaking an entirely different language. Not quite sure what to do next, Naruto just looked around the room before sighing. Well, doesn't this just suck? The room fell into an uncomfortable silence as Naruto regarded his acquaintances again. If ever there was a time he could scream bloody murder at his woeful luck, it was now. At least they understood gestures, if the refilling of the cup was anything to go by. Letting out another sigh, Naruto scratched his head. If only he knew where he was, he might have a chance at finding his way home. Hearing a cough to his left, he looked down at the old man. A few unintelligible words popped out of his mouth that left Naruto looking at him with a completely blank stare. Hearing a pretty laugh, the first girl he saw stood forward and exchanged a few words with the old man. Whatever she said convinced him to nod and jump down off the bed. Smiling as she watched him walk back, the white-haired girl turned and gave Naruto a slight bow. Placing her hands on her rather ample chest, she patted it a few times. It took a finger pointing up to her face for Naruto to realize the chest patting wasn't the main aim of the gesture. The red-headed girl was giving him a rather scary look while the girl before him just laughed humorously before repeating herself. Jane. Realizing she was telling him her name, Naruto nodded his understanding. Jane. Squealing happily, the girl clapped her hands and then held her hand out in a questioning manner. It took a moment but eventually Naruto realized she was asking him his name. Naruto. She raised a questioning eyebrow as she tried to repeat it. Naruto. Snorting, Naruto shook his head and tried again. Naruto. Smiling, Jane tried out the corrected name. Naruto. She then burst into a flurry of weird words that Naruto suspected were greetings or something. Who knew? Seeing his questioning look though, the girl stopped and gave him a sad smile before stepping back. She then said something which resulted in the pink-haired boy running forward and leaning way too far into Naruto's personal bubble. It must have been an invitation for the others to introduce themselves. Trying to get some space, Naruto held his hands out and gave him a shove. The boy's eyes widened before a sharp blow to the back of his head from the warrior girl calmed him down. Taking a breath, he locked eyes with his new plaything and dragged his name out like he was talking to a child, all the while pointing at his face with both hands. Natsu. Rolling his eyes, Naruto sighed. Right, Natsu, got it. Next please. The blonde had to resist the urge to facepalm when all he got was a vacant look. He couldn't even insult anyone here. What a way to take away a guy's power. He wasn't allowed to lament the fact either before the strong redhead grabbed the boy and threw him into the back wall. Looking past the girl, Naruto whistled when he saw Natsu embedded into the wall face first. This girl was strong. Hearing her growl, Naruto quickly sat up straight and focused. She mightn't have been as strong as him, but for the moment, it'd probably be wise to pay attention. The woman said her name once, expecting him to remember it well. Naruto made sure to. Erza. Thinking it'd be polite, Naruto bowed his head slightly in her direction before repeating her name. Seemingly satisfied, she returned the nod with one of her own and a smile before stepping back. Next up was the bouncy blonde girl who stuck her hand out with a smile. Lucy. Grinning, Naruto took her hand in his and shook. He was thinking he'd like this girl once he got to know her. Her squeal of pain though made him retract his hand in shock as Erza swiftly seemed to pull a sword out of nowhere. A kunai was instantly in his hand as he calculated this newest potential threat while scoping out the nearest exits. The tension was quickly broken though as Lucy jumped between them, holding her hands out and saying something rapidly. Erza seemed to be okay with whatever it was because the woman relaxed. She gave the girl a nod before her sword quite literally glowed before disappearing. Naruto's eyes widened in surprise but still had the mind to pocket his kunai. He hadn't seen a storage seal anywhere when that happened. His attention was brought back to Lucy though as she gave him an apologetic look while saying something. It seemed she wasn't blaming him for the mistake. He accepted it with a sheepish smile of his own as he scratched the back of his head. How was he supposed to know her hand was that weak? Finally, that weird little man from before jumped forward and gave Naruto a healthy smile, raising a hand towards him in a salute. Makarov. The old man then extended his hand. Naruto hesitantly took it before quickly having to up the grip strength. For a little guy, he had a pretty strong hold. Dropping his hand, Naruto absently rubbed his knuckles as he looked around the group again. Murajane said something to Lucy that had the girl running up the stairs, perhaps in search of something. Feeling his stomach rumble, Naruto held it unhappily. It felt like it had been forever since he had eaten. Looking at the white-haired girl, it seemed like she had the greatest chance of knowing where the food was. So in a universal gesture for food, Naruto opened his mouth wide and pointed. Lucy stood back as the master moved in to greet the new boy. She wiped away a few beads of sweat from her brow after having managed to successfully break up the fight that nearly happened between Erza and Naruto. Her hands still hurt from that shake. Even Erza's grip wasn't that strong. She shifted over slightly as Murajane moved up beside her. Well, isn't this interesting? Lucy nodded, giving her hand one last rub. Yeah, I know. I mean, he doesn't even speak our language. I've never come across anyone who couldn't. I wonder where he's from. Murajane shook her head, just as confused as her friend. I wouldn't know, sorry. But to appear from thin air like that, I've never heard of teleportation magic like that, especially if it was causing him pain. Lucy frowned slightly. It almost makes you wonder if he even wanted to come here. He might have been attacked by someone and had a spell cast on him. Murajane let out a light breath as she watched the blonde boy interact with the master. Suddenly, her eyes lit up as an idea came to mind. Lucy, would you mind going and finding Levi for me? If there's anyone who could find out a way to talk to Naruto-san, it'd be her. Lucy's eyes widened as she heard the suggestion. Good thinking, Mira-chan. I'll be right back. Dashing up the stairs, Lucy looked over her shoulder as she heard her well-natured friend let out a loud, pretty laugh. Reaching the main dining hall, Lucy skidded to a stop before looking around. Seeing a tuft of blue locks, she smiled before calling out and running over. Levi, there you are. Can I get you to come with me quickly? The girl looked up from the book she was reading. Seeing one of her close friends, she smiled brightly and waved. Lucy, what's going on? Reaching her, Lucy threw a thumb over her shoulder at the door she came from. That boy we found has finally woken up. You'll never guess what though, he speaks a different language. Instantly, Levi's eyes widened exponentially in glee. No way, that is so cool. SHH. Lucy put her hands out, shushing her friend. I don't think Master wants everyone to know just yet. Blushing, Levi scratched her cheek. Oh, sorry, I get carried away sometimes. But yeah, take me to him. Gathering her stuff, Levi handed half of it to Lucy, and they started walking. So has he done anything cool yet? Lucy shook her head. No, not really. We found out his name though. It was Naruto or something. Oh, and he's really strong too. I shook his hand and he nearly crushed mine without even meaning to. Erza almost attacked him for that though. Both girls imagined the outcome and shivered. Yeah, we wouldn't really want that to happen. Quickly shaking off the gloom, Lucy smiled as they neared the door. It's okay, but I convinced Erza it was just a mistake. Mira-chan was actually the one who came up with the idea to get you down to see if you can do anything about the language barrier. Levi giggled happily at the prospect. I hope so. I love a good challenge. Walking down the stairs and through the doors, both girls stopped dead and dropped their jaws with everyone else in the room as they watched Naruto tucking into what seemed like his fifth bowl of food, if the empty plates were anything to go by. Quickly licking the remaining crumbs from the plate, he handed the dirty ones to Murajane as she passed him a full new plate. He sent her a beaming smile before nearly inhaling the most recent plate. He's a hungry one. Sweat dropping at the girl's casual remark, Lucy turned and whispered into her friend's ear. I take what I said back. Here's something interesting about him. He's a bottomless pit. Giggling into her hand, Levy nodded and walked over to an unoccupied table. Spreading out her things, she waved Lucy over. I have an idea that may work. Just let me get my pen and a piece of paper and we'll get started. Naruto nodded his thanks to Murajane as she passed him another load of food. He had absolutely no idea what this stuff he was eating was, but it was delicious. Obviously it was no ramen, but still pretty damn good. Finishing off the plate, he sent his new most favorite girl in the whole world a charming smile, while waving the plate, asking for more. When he didn't get a response, he opened his eyes and saw a small blue-haired girl standing before him. Her shoulder-length hair was pulled back with an orange bandana and her lithe body was covered by a short, orange one-piece dress with white straps to hold it up. Like the other women he'd met thus far, she seemed to have rather large eyes, hers being a light brown. Having another look at her lovely dress, he smiled happily. This was the second person who knew the wonders of the magical color orange. He was rather quickly warming to these new people. They knew good clothes. Patting himself on the chest, he grinned at her. Naruto. Seeing her giggle, she nodded and repeated the motion. Levy. She then proceeded to lay out a sheet of paper before him and pulled a pen from within her blouse. As Naruto looked down at it curiously, the girl wrote some strange glyphs down and pointed at them. Naruto. He looked at her blankly. Sighing patiently, Levy pointed at him, then at the marks. Naruto. Thinking for a second, Naruto nodded slowly. It seemed she had written his name down. Seeing him begin to understand, Levy then handed him the pen. Looking at it curiously, she made a writing movement in the air, pointed at the paper and said his name again. Holding the pen out hesitantly, he looked at her. Seeing her nod and say his name once more, Naruto wrote his name down as neatly as possible. It seemed the girl had something planned. Smiling thankfully at him, she took her pen back and then placed her hands on the paper. She said a few weird words and then suddenly a bright gold circle filled with all manner of letters and pictures exploded from her hands. Instincts honed by years of battle sent him to the roof in an instantaneous jump, chakra flowing to his feet, and gluing him to the ceiling as he stared down at her in surprise. Hearing a cry of disbelief, Naruto looked over at the now upside-down Lucy. Her eyes were wide and a shaky finger was pointing up at him like she'd never seen someone use chakra before. Pursing his lips, Naruto wondered if they even had ever seen someone use chakra. The weird language, coupled with the strange dress style, weird writing and subtle differences in facial structure was slowly convincing him he was somewhere very far away from home. Grinning awkwardly, he stood up and released his hold on the roof, flipping down to land gracefully back on his bed. During that time though, something weird had happened on the piece of paper. Ignoring the still pointing blonde girl, Naruto looked in with interest. The writing had been absorbed into the paper and replaced with something else. Levy then took her pen and wrote something down. Turning, she called out to the still unconscious Natsu. Erza quickly woke him up with a slap to the face before pushing him over to Levy. She spoke to him before he grinned and lifted his hand. Again, Naruto found himself wanting to jump to the roof when his hand exploded into flame. Sending Natsu a wide-eyed look, Naruto wondered what else these weird people could do. The boy just laughed at Naruto's unease and waved his hand around a little. This time, Levy pointed at the flames and said something in her language. She repeated the word a few times then pointed at the piece of paper. Naruto quickly caught on now that he understood the game. She was trying to compare their written language for some reason. She must have found a way to translate it. Enjoying the new game, Naruto let a smile creep onto his face. Fire, laughing happily, Levy then handed Naruto the pen and he quickly wrote down the word. This time, Levy didn't need to do anything and the words faded into the paper together. Turning, the girl found a blank sheet of paper and pointed at it before writing down what it was. Nodding, Naruto took the offered pen and quickly wrote down what it was. He realized the process might take a while, but it'd be worth it in the end. It was taking a few hours, but the excitement on Naruto's face was more than enough to keep the group entertained as Levy worked. Natsu had needed to be forcefully evicted a little while into the session after he started getting just as excited as Naruto, and began to spew flames everywhere. After he had been kicked out, the group had found Naruto firmly attached to the ceiling again. Staring at the door they booted Natsu out of with owlish eyes. This time the shock wasn't as great and the group laughed at him, extremely amused by the blonde's defensive reaction. Naruto had pouted rather heavily at this before flipping down to the bed, sulking to himself. Ignoring his discomfort, the brilliant girl before him had continued to toil away, slowly working through easily identifiable objects in the room. This continued on for another half an hour until Levy grinned and turned to face her friends. Alright, hopefully this will work now. Fingers crossed. Looking down at the paper curiously, Erza frowned as Levi scurried around the room trying to find something that hadn't already been translated. So, what are you hoping to do? Levi's small backside answered as she rooted around in a cupboard. I think I have enough information from his language now to begin to translate our words to his. A lot of his characters have started repeating themselves in the words, so hopefully now I can write it down so he can understand it. The best part now is if I misspell anything, he can correct it for me and speed up the process even more. So all I need is something. Aha. Crawling out, Levi held up an old rock that had been hiding down the back of the cupboard for who knew how long. Running back up to Naruto, she sent him a grin and wrote rock down. Seeing him reach out for the pen, she grinned and shook her head. Not this time, sorry. Let's hope this works. Quickly scribbling down some runes beside the word, it disappeared before reappearing as a word in the foreign script. Looking up hopefully, she saw Naruto's eyes widened and a massive grin split his face before he tackled Levi in a massive hug, spinning her around a few times before setting the now dizzy girl down. He pointed at the piece of paper and started babbling away, probably asking how she did that. Holding her head, she stabilized herself before looking up at him and shrugging. Sorry, I can't really tell you how until I understand you better. The blonde seemed to understand the sentence as he grinned sheepishly and jumped back onto the bed. Nevertheless, first contact had been made. Sitting there with wide eyes, Naruto waited to see what was to happen next. Levi then smiled and handed him the pen, motioning for him to write something. He grinned and quickly started scribbling down a few words. Leaning back, he watched the paper intensely as it translated. Flicking up the result, the group leaned in. Hey, nice to meet your guys. Woo. Cheering loudly, Lucy high-fived Levi and then gave her a quick hug. Letting the girl get back to work, Levi started studying what went wrong. Obviously this is just a first test, but we should be able to work out the lettering problems soon enough. There, let's fix it up on our end. She then sent him the edited version. Reading it, he gave her the thumbs up to show he understood. Leaning in, Lucy pointed at herself. Do you mind if I have a go? Not at all. Clapping her hands happily, the blonde girl quickly scribbled down something. Standing back, they waited as Naruto tried to decipher the message. A moment passed before he grew a little pale and a small trickle of blood ran down his nose. Looking over in confusion, Levi questioned her friend. What did you write? Looking equally confused, Lucy shook her head. I just said he's wearing nice clothes and I'd like a girl set. Naruto absent-mindedly wiped away the small dribble of red from his nose. He had gotten excited when Lucy decided to write something down, but hadn't expected, I want Tobe in her clothes like a girl pair. There was no chance she knew about his female transformation technique, but it didn't help that his imagination ran overtime at the idea. Pausing, Naruto tried his best to correct the mistakes, making sure to put a rather big question mark at the end. When it went through, Makarov and Murijin burst out laughing while Lucy buried her head in her hands, instantly bright red. Erza also had the most peculiar look on her face, like she couldn't believe what Lucy just wrote. Levi just laughed at her friend's expense and wrote down what she originally meant. Reading the updated version, Naruto breathed a sigh of relief. That could have gotten messy pretty quickly if they hadn't been so understanding. Sakura-chan would have sent him through a wall for even thinking it. He didn't think Lucy would want to write him any more messages anytime soon. Doing his best to compose himself, Naruto grabbed the pen and changed topics. So, where am I? Seeing the message received, he saw Levi and Makarov quickly talk between themselves before settling on something. Her pen flashed as she wrote down a couple of lines quickly before letting them sink into the paper. A moment passed and then they appeared. You're in currently the guild fairytail. The area though called is Magnolia. Frowning, Naruto tapped his chin. A guild called Fairytail. Magnolia. Just where is this place? Taking the pen, he wrote down his questions very carefully, not wanting to cause any confusion. Magnolia. Where is that located in regards to the elemental nations? It went through but took Levi a second to properly correct the words. Once fixed though, she frowned in confusion and looked up at him. Quickly checking something with Erza, she wrote down her reply slowly. I'm sorry, but none of us have ever heard of that place. The fact her sentence had been correctly translated totally blew over Naruto's head as his eyes widened and his face paled slightly. Quickly snatching back the pen, he hurriedly wrote down, how did I get here? Waiting for the group to discuss his appearance, he clenched his fists as he desperately tried to wait as patiently as he could. He was nearly biting his nails by the time Levi finished writing down her response. Grabbing the paper, he picked it up and read it as quickly as he could. Lucy found you. You seem teleport to appear in the air by a whirlpool swirling air vortex. Dropping the paper, Naruto tried to digest the information. If what he read was right, then someone sent him here via some crazy jutsu. Racking his brains for answers, he didn't notice the gentle hands that rested lightly on his arms in support. Come on Naruto, what could have it been? What could it have been? I was with Kakashi-sensei at the time. I think I was too far from the village to have anyone else be there. Wait, what about that cloaked guy standing over me? He would have just carried me though. But then there was that explosion. Groaning as his eyes clenched in thought, Murajane and Lucy looked at each other worriedly while rubbing each arm respectively. Nira, the white-haired girl, couldn't say anything, so she just shook her head in concern. Okay, think back. If Kakashi was there, what could he maybe have done? Trying his best, Naruto started running through the list of techniques his teacher had. The fact Kakashi had copied something close to 1,000 techniques though made things a bit tricky for the academically challenged boy. Come on Kakashi, what was there? What was that? Thinking back, Naruto dimly remembered the fight with him, Kakashi, and that weird chick-looking guy from the Akatsuki who had mouths in his hands. Didn't Kakashi do something weird back then? He did say something about trying to suck his head into something. And according to his memory, it did seem to distort the air. Opening his eyes, he finally noticed the gentle hands on his arms. Pausing, he tried to think of the best way to handle such contact. Biting his lip, he settled for an awkward smile before reaching out for the pen again. Tapping the tip a few times, he started writing. So I came through a crazy spiral in the air. Reading the question, Lucy nodded and stepped back, trying to imitate the thing she saw. It wasn't all that great a description, but it served its purpose. Nodding unhappily, Naruto sighed and looked at the floor. Well, that's just great. It must have been Kakashi's kamui authority of the gods. I think it was, unless it was that other weird guy above me, but I doubt it. Rubbing his head, Naruto looked up and wrote down another question. Can you take me to where I appeared? Lucy hesitated, looking at the old man. He shook his head and said something. Through the paper, he said, not today. It's a fair journey and it's late. Maybe tomorrow, weather permitting. Huffing, Naruto didn't care if it was midnight, but there wasn't a lot he could do without a guide. So grabbing the pen, he asked another question. So how long have I been here? Murajane took up the pen this time, her elegant handwriting gracing the page. I've been caring for you for close to 2 days now. Naruto's eyes widened as he read this. 2 days. Even after being kicked around like a rag doll by the Akatsuki, he was alright after a good night's sleep. Whatever brought him here must have really taken it out of him. At that moment, a memory flash of the unimaginable pain reared its head and Naruto growled before quickly slapping a palm to his forehead. The pain was gone as soon as it appeared, but the after effects remained. He heard some worried chattering from the girls but just waved them off with a disarming smile. Stretching his neck, Naruto lifted himself up easily into a handstand before flipping off the bed. Winding an arm around quickly, he looked back down at the paper and asked if he was able to do some light exercises. He was getting rather fidgety after sitting still for so long that a chance to unleash a little energy would do him good. Seeing Makarov nod, Erza stepped forward and motioned for him to follow. Looking back, he saw Murajane and Makarov waving him goodbye while Levi and Lucy were grabbing some things to bring with them. It seemed they'd appointed themselves the official translators for Naruto. Shrugging, he bounced on his toes before running out the door and up the stairs. Reaching the top, he paused and looked around the massive room he had entered in awe. It seemed he had been in the basement the whole time and was now in the main eating area of this fairy tale place. Massive stone pillars held up the roof that seemed to be close to 30 feet above him, and a mezzanine floor off to the side, which also seemed to have a bar underneath it. If he could take a guess, he'd place his numbers on that Murajane worked under there. There was a board beside that which seemed to hold a bunch of papers all stuck haphazardly across it in no particular order. Scanning the rest of the place, he found it full of wooden boxes that sat off in the corners of the room, along with long benches that still had a few sleepy-looking people seated at them. There were a few circular tables closer to the bar that had grubby-looking wooden barrels as seats scattered around them. Hearing a sharp call, he turned to see Erza staring at him pointedly, no doubt telling him to hurry up. He saw Lucy and Levi walking past him, chatting to each other animatedly about something. Probably him, if the little glances they were stealing were anything to go by. Jogging out, he met up with Erza, who looked to the sheet of paper Levi had. Taking it up in one hand, she quickly wrote something down and handed it to him. "I'll take you to a training ground near here. Try keep up." Looking at the two girls carrying the books, they just smiled and made a shooing motion at him. Grinning, he turned back to Erza and tightened his Konoha headband before grinning. "Lead the way, Erza." The woman didn't respond, instead closing her eyes and calling out in a loud voice. Naruto jumped back in surprise as Erza's entire body began to glow a golden yellow as several bright tendrils lashed out from her, wrapping around her now nude from opening her eyes after the transformation. Erza was now dressed in a set of long pants with the bottoms of them in a delightful orange, reaching up half her shins in the patterns of wild flames. A black line traced them, separating the color from the vibrant red that made up the rest of her pants. White pocket things hung from each hip, and from there up, there was skin. Lots of skin. Naruto struggled to tear his eyes away from the barely covered chest of the woman who stood before him. Aside from some tight bandages that held her considerable bust in place, there wasn't a scrap of fabric elsewhere. A little voice in Naruto's head quietly mentioned that he never would have guessed she was that big under her chest plate. Deciding he'd had a quick enough look, he peered up to see Erza smirking at him. Her hair had also changed. Before, it hung freely down her back to about her waist. Now it was pulled back into a single ponytail. She crooked a finger at him in a follow-me motion. Turning, she knelt down before dashing off at a surprising speed into the dimming light. Naruto just watched her go for a moment in awe before a giggle behind him brought him back from his daze. Blushing ever so slightly, he coughed and channeled some chakra to his legs, taking off in a high-speed rush. The squeal of surprise from both girls behind him made the boy smirk. No one made fun of the mighty Uzumaki and got away with it. Looking over her shoulder, Erza tisked in annoyance. That blonde boy was easily keeping up with her for some reason, and this was one of her faster suits. Granted, she wasn't anything near full pace, but it was far beyond what a normal human could run. Vaulting a bridge, she saw Naruto front flip the whole thing, land in a roll and pop straight back up, a cheeky grin on his face. Frowning, Erza started to pick up the pace. He thinks he's so good showing off. Let's see him try keep up with this. Leaning low to the ground, Erza gave a might kick and shot forward, nearly doubling her speed. Hearing a cry of surprise from her companion, she allowed a little triumphant smirk as she left him behind in the dust cloud. The smirk quickly turned to a growl as she realized Naruto landed heavily beside her, seeming like he had just jumped from that cloud. Seeing a challenging grin on his face, Erza sent him one of her own before ducking around a tight corner. The two of them began a game of tag across the city as they vaulted, dodged, swung, and kicked off all forms of objects in an effort to one-up each other. Erza couldn't say she wasn't surprised either when Naruto took to running along the walls of the buildings, sticking to them like he was running across flat ground. He noticed her shocked glance though and sent her another cheeky grin. Puffing to herself, Erza looked forward, determined not to let him catch her off guard like that again. One final large jump later, Erza landed in an open field. Hearing the thump of a body behind her, she turned to face Naruto, who was looking around curiously. Narrowing her eyes when he wasn't looking, she scrutinized the blonde. He wasn't showing a hint of fatigue after all that running despite keeping pace with her. Erza probably had the highest levels of stamina in the guild, so meeting someone who had just as much energy as her was unusual. Dropping to the ground in a wide split, Erza reached for her toes as she warmed her muscles up. Seeing the girl stretching, Naruto gave her a curious glance before shrugging and beginning some gentle exercises himself. If she wanted to fight him, who was he to say no? Levi and Lucy were now standing at the training ground with both their mouths open a little as they watched the show going on before them. The conversation they were previously having was completely forgotten as they watched the two combatants dance for them. For how energetically they were going at it, the girls guessed that they must have been doing it for over 15 minutes. But with them having only just left maybe 20 minutes ago, that means they made it all the way out here in just over 5 minutes. Wow, I had no idea he's be able to keep up with Erza-san of all people. What made them even more nervous though was that during the brief flashes they could see, both fighters had huge grins on their faces, looking like they were having all the fun in the world. Tearing her eyes away from the spectacle, Levi made herself walk to a free bench and start sorting out her books. Lucy followed and began laying out her pile as well. So, what's the next step with Naruto-san? Levi showcased some impressive multitasking abilities as she continued to talk while sorting through her material. Well, now that we can talk a bit with Naruto, I wouldn't mind learning his language. I'm expecting that I'd be able to pick it up faster than he would, so doing that means no more annoying pieces of paper. It'll probably take me a few days, but I'll get it soon enough. For how weird it sounds though, I think his syllabary doesn't have all that many more characters than our own, so thankfully that will make it pretty easy to pick up. Every now and then though he throws in a new symbol I haven't seen. Some seem to double up on meanings though, so it's becoming a game of pick and choose what character I'd like to use. Lucy's sweat dropped and just nodded, quite happy she wasn't the one tasked with translating Naruto directly. Dropping down beside her friend, she turned her eyes back to the two fighters and let out a sigh. What's wrong? Resting her chin in a palm, Lucy gave Levi a lopsided grin. Oh, it's nothing. It's just that all of a sudden, this random boy pops out of nowhere and he's as strong as Erza. And just wondering how long it'll be before I'm as strong as them. Smiling up at her friend, Levi patted her arm. Soon, Luce, real soon, I'm sure of it. Just keep practicing and I bet in maybe a year or two, you'll soon be in the middle of fights just like that. Lucy shivered as Levi went back to organizing papers. I certainly wouldn't be in something like that by choice. Hearing a final boom, both girls looked over to see Naruto and Erza spring apart, each wiping a light coating of sweat from their brows. Well done. It's been a while since I've had a fight like that. Come take a break before we get started again. Erza then sighed as Naruto gave her a clueless look. Waving him over, she pointed at the seat and made a tipping motion with her hand like she was drinking something. Understanding springing to his face, he nodded happily and ran over, passing Erza as she calmly walked back. Reaching the seat, he looked around for a bottle but didn't find one. Looking back at Erza, he shrugged. Rolling her eyes, the woman let out a sigh before pointing at a bubbler. Wondering what it was, Naruto wandered over to it, walking around the pole a few times. Tapping it, he grasped the handle and twisted, receiving a blast of water to his face. Coughing and spluttering, he stumbled back and wiped his eyes as all three girls burst out laughing. Sneezing once, Naruto looked at them through a half-opened eye and blushed slightly, though grinning all the same. Erza shook her head with a smile as Naruto tried again and looked down at the smallest of the three. So what do you think will be happening next? I'd imagine you'd want to learn his language. Nodding, Levi flicked through a few pages that had most of Naruto's alphabet on it. Yep, I nearly understand his written language, so from that, I want to start talking to him without paper. Then, I can teach him our language. Erza smiled at her and placed a hand on her head. As I'd expect of you, I do ask that you try and learn it as fast as you can though. I'm quickly growing tired of writing to him like he's my pen pal. Chuckling to herself, Levi blushed at the praise. Oh, it's nothing special, just doing what I can. Anyway, here's that pen and the translating piece of paper. I'd assume he'd have some questions for you. Oh, and I also tweaked it so it will pick up any mistakes and correct them as the chance comes. Nodding, Erza walked over to Naruto and found him wiping his mouth as he finished drinking. Handing him the pen and paper, she refreshed herself as Naruto started scribbling away on the paper. Wiping her own mouth, she accepted the question. So how did you get so wrong? And what was up with the glow body? Erza chuckled and started writing. To answer your first question, just lots of hard work. As for the second, that's my magic, requip. Handing it back, Naruto studied the paper before he looked up at Erza in confusion. He handed her the paper back. Magic? The redhead's eyebrows rose at the question. Yes, magic. It's something every living creature in Earthland has, but only a small percentage can actually use it. The paper was handed over. But, isn't magic just a myth? Erza frowned at the question. No, it is a part of everyone, even you, I'd imagine. Why, how did you do the things you did? Chakra, that's what's in me, not magic. Staring at Naruto, Erza wasn't convinced. Show me. Shrugging, Naruto stood back. Alright. Assuming the ram hand seal, the blonde began drawing upon his massive reserves. A slight blue glow began to encompass his form and Erza took a step back as a small breeze started blowing her pants and hair around. When it started buffeting her about a bit more, she held a hand out. Alright, I believe you. Hearing her speak, Naruto looked up and lowered his hands questioningly. Erza growled and grabbed the annoying piece of paper. I believe you now. I have a great many questions I'd like to ask, but this method is far too cumbersome. Levi is working on learning your language, so once she has that completed, we will talk more about it then. Taking a moment to read the note, Naruto gave Erza a firm smile before scribbling back down something. That's fine by me. I also got a bunch of questions for you and Levi and Lucy Bea at Magic 2, Databeo. Pausing, Erza considered the last word. Databeo. Realizing his slip-up, Naruto just blushed and waved the question away. The girl smirked. A catchphrase. How cute. Walking back over to Levi, she handed her back the paper. My thanks. For now, myself and Naruto will continue to lightly spar. If you could stay with us until we finish, it would be greatly appreciated. Lucy's sweat dropped while Levi agreed cheerfully. That was a light spar. Shaking her head, she held her hair as Erza kicked up a small whirlwind as she jumped back to confront Naruto. Watching as they re-engaged in their fight, Lucy couldn't help but lean in closer to her friend. So, what do you think that weird blue glow around Naruto was? Words were flicking across the translator paper and Levi was watching them intently. I'm just going through the history to see. Lucy's eyebrows rose. You can do that. Levi hummed vacantly before pausing the words. Here, Naruto-san is saying something about chakra. I wonder what that is. Lucy shook her head. When it comes to him, I don't think I understand a single thing. I can't wait to be able to talk normally with him. Levi nodded in agreement as a plume of dirt was sent into the air via a missed kick from Erza. Neither can I guess I'll just have to work doubly as hard to learn his language. After the group had left, Murajane and the master decided to hang back and try work out what to do with Naruto. That, and try clean up the mess that was always left at the end of a standard day. Murajane worked the wide spaces and bench tops, while Makarov cleaned under the tables. Being short had its advantages. Straightening up from one table, Mira wiped her forehead and looked over at a jiggling table. So where do you think we should have Naruto sleep? He can stay here for another few nights, but having him live in the basement isn't all that great. Giving one final thump, the table grew still and Makarov jumped up onto the top of it. I suppose it could be a problem. I'd say let him stay up at fairy dorms for a day or two, but he'd be eaten alive by the girls up there. Mira shook her head. Not to mention it is girls only. Makarov shrugged. Since when did that ever stop me? Also, with him having absolutely no money, he couldn't really afford to stay anywhere outside of the guild either. I wonder if he'll be alright here by himself though. Mira tilted her head to the side, giving her master a happy smile. Oh, that's no problem there. I don't mind staying and making sure he's okay. Now that I can actually talk with him also makes everything easier. Looking up at his taller partner, Makarov scratched his mustache. Well, that would be a great help, Mira. It also takes away the chance that he'd nick something while we weren't here. Not a problem at all. Hearing a noise at the door, they turned from their conversation and saw the group walking through the large entrance. After finishing up the spar with Erza, Naruto and the group had taken a leisurely pace back to the guild so the newcomer could take in the sights. He mostly ignored the amused giggles from the girls as he looked around in fascination. The roads were all covered in a smooth cobblestone, with the majority of the buildings having it raise a few feet up the shop front before turning into a smooth render, usually colored in grays and whites with the occasional touch of brown. It was pretty in a rather quaint way, though Naruto would never admit that out loud, even if the girls couldn't understand him. There was the occasional horse-drawn carriage tied off to the side of the road as well, though the actual horses were nowhere to be seen. Grabbing the ever-trusty piece of paper, Naruto scribbled something down. It seems like a pretty safe area around here. No locks on the carts or anything. Nodding, Levi looked around fondly. Yeah, it's a pretty good place. With Fairytail just down the road, criminal acts are pretty rare. Nodding, Naruto fixed up the spelling mistakes. The paper glowed slightly in the low light as it adjusted to the changes. Handing it back, he went back to looking around. There weren't many trees, but even so, the structure of the town reminded him of home. He sighed, a thoughtful look on his face. It was a nice getaway, he supposed, but he'd also really like to get back and say hello to his friends. He didn't get the chance after the fight. Tucking his hands into his pockets, he began to unconsciously tune into the light conversation beside him. It was a funny language, if for how their mouths moved more than anything. They seemed to use their lips as a completely method to his, so the unusual movements distracted him from his sightseeing. It had a pleasant sound though, as it seemed to gently run from their mouths effortlessly. Smiling slightly, Naruto could see himself falling asleep to the noise. He heard his name briefly amongst the rest of the incomprehensible language, and he rolled his eyes with a grin. What are they talking about now? I wish I could just learn how to speak it already. Naruto. Hearing his name, he saw Lucy pointing at a house and waving at him. Must have been her home. Nodding, Naruto sent her a grin and a wave as she ran up to her house. She disappeared behind the door with a click and a final wave. Smiling to himself, Naruto clasped his hands behind his head and started walking. An elbow to his ribs made him look down, seeing Levi with a suspect look on her face, grinning seedily. Nudging her back, Naruto stuck his tongue out at her in a teasing manner. The group then fell into a comfortable silence as they walked the rest of the way back. Wiping their shoes, Levi was the first to run forward, bowing slightly to the master and grinning at Murajane. Well, we're back. Mira nodded happily, hands clasping a tray before her. Welcome back. Did you have fun? The small girl nodded. Yup. Also, I think I've pretty much worked out the kinks in Naruto's writings, so as of tomorrow, I'll be trying to learn his language. Makarov nodded his approval. Well done. That'll be a big help. I've only used that paper once and that was annoying enough in itself. Blushing, Levi mumbled something that sounded bashful and stood off to the side. Giggling at the humble girl, Mira turned back to the remaining two and bowed slightly. Welcome back. I trust it went few. Holding her nose, Murajane stuck her tongue out. You two stink. Showers, now. Erza lifted an arm and gave her pit a hefty whiff while Naruto ducked his head into his jacket. I'm sorry, I didn't realize we worked so hard. Please forgive the smell. Sighing, Murajane nodded but didn't let go of her small nose. It's pretty humid tonight, so I guess it's expected. Wait, Naruto, what are you doing? While not able to understand the words, Naruto understood plenty well enough that Murajane thought they stunk. So in true Naruto fashion, he advanced on her slowly, arms wide in an inviting hug. Taking a step back, Mira's eyes widened. No, no, Naruto, please no. Letting out an evil laugh, Naruto charged. Mira let out a girlish scream and threw her tray into the air, dashing around to the far side of a table. Watching the two play, Makarov chuckled to himself as the pair ran circles around the benches. So Erza, myself and Murajane were just discussing where Naruto could stay outside of the guild. He's welcome to stay as long as needed, but once he adapts to Magnolia, he'll have to live elsewhere. A basement isn't where someone like him should live. Any ideas? Erza grinned as Naruto's hand snagged Murajane's dress, eliciting a squeal from the girl. I can have a think for you, master. I doubt he'd want to stay with Natsu and Happy. Gray might more be his style. If all else fails, I could lend him some money and have him pay me back at 3% interest a month. Suddenly, a horrified shriek sounded out as Naruto jumped on Mira after having successfully run her into a corner. No mercy was spared as the blonde held her in a tight embrace, making extra sure to rub his cheek against the squirming Mira's. Naruto just laughed and let go after a moment, avoiding the angry swipe at his head with ease. Mira was now well and truly coated in dirt and other substances, an adorable pout on her face to complement the look. Naruto's infectious laugh quickly cracked her facade though, and the girl found herself beginning to grin with him. Hearing a chuckle, she looked over at the master and Erza. It seems like Naruto here is just as adept at lightening the mood as Natsu is. Giving up, Mira let out a defeated sigh and smiled. I suppose it is too hard to stay angry at him. Still, she leveled a pout at Naruto and pointed at him. I will get you back though. Seeing the confused look on his face, Mira smirked and started dusting herself down. Getting what she could off, she sighed and looked over to where Levi was sitting. The girl had a strange look on her face, almost looking like Erza did those few times Mira caught her reading those dirty books of hers. Pausing, she shook her head and smiled like usual. Levi, could you please tell Naruto that he will be staying here again for the night? Also, tell him there is a shower at the far left hand of the basement. Levi's face returned to normal and she nodded, writing down what was requested, then calling over Naruto. Seeing the message, Naruto turned and saluted Mira cheekily before running off to get clean, avoiding the cloth Murajane chucked at him. Grinning like a grandfather at their antics, Makarov turned for the door with a chuckle. Well, it seems you two lovers have things mostly sorted here. I guess I'll leave you to it. Master. Oh, and one more thing. Makarov looked over his shoulder. Tell Naruto to grab a photo of you two for me if you end up making out. Master. Giggling perversely, the little man scurried out the door, a tray slamming into it just after him. Sighing, Murajane shook her head at the insatiable old fool. His voice then floated back in through the safety of the door. While you're at it, you can put the tables back in the basement. Might as well introduce our visitor to the rest of the mob. Thanks. Mira didn't answer, still pouting at his lecherous crack. Master will never change. I suppose I should follow his lead too. Levi, hearing Erza call her, the small girl nodded and ran over. Here, I'm sure you can find more use for it tonight than we will. Seeing the girl send her a wink, Mira widened her eyes. Honestly, what was wrong with everyone tonight? Erza just chuckled and clapped the light girl on the shoulder, sending her spiraling into a bench with a crash. Enough for tonight. I must be home. Levi, dragging herself from the wreckage, Levi unstably righted her bandana before giving them a shaky thumbs up. As sure, Murajane watched as the two walked, staggered out and sighed. Perverse as half of them were, they would always be her closest of friends. Turning back to the benches, she absent-mindedly righted the overturned table and continued cleaning the rest, all the while humming to herself softly. Naruto wandered from the shower toweling off his hair. He had sealed away his training gear to be washed later whenever he got that chance. He paused when he was greeted with the sight of Murajane struggling to move a table into position. When she saw him, she smiled and straightened up. She cocked an eyebrow though when she saw Naruto's new gear. She drew her hands down her body and then pointed at Naruto questioningly. Looking around, Naruto made a writing motion in the air. The paper quickly found itself in his hand. I sealed my clothes away to be washed later. These are just a spare set of sleepers I keep with me at all times. Eyes widening in surprise, Murajane took the sheet. Sealed. And where did you keep these pants? I didn't find them anywhere when I washed you the first night you got here. Reading the reply, Naruto phased out slightly. Murajane, washing him. Nice. Clearing his thoughts, he grabbed the pen. Yeah, I'll show you. As Mira read it, Naruto pulled his scroll out. Placing it on the floor, the girl above him leaned in curiously. Grinning, Naruto placed a palm to the strange circular marking in the middle of the page and channeled some chakra. He laughed when Mira cried out at the small explosion as it revealed his dirty clothes. Waving away the smoke, she pinched her nose and looked at them in surprise, absolutely astounded at where they came from. You're a equipped magician like Erza. Naruto shook his head. No, I activate this by something called Chakra. I'll tell you more about it once Levi can translate for me. Nodding, Murajane winced at the smell. Well still, we can't leave these as they are. Bring them with me, we'll leave them to soak in the sink. Kicking up the putrid mess, he dumped them in the running water and turned to Mira. So what were you doing with the tables? The girl wiped her hands down before replying. This was the mess hall before you came along. Now you're awake. Master said we can move everything back. Naruto raised a questioning eyebrow. Master, Murajane gasped softly. That's right, you don't know, do you? Makarov is the master of this guild, the #1 strongest mage we have. Naruto's eyes widened in disbelief. You mean that tiny little old guy? Yeah, he had a good handshake, but the strongest. Smiling, Mira nodded. Yep, no one can hold a candle to him when he goes all out. Whistling, Naruto leant back on a table. Who would have guessed? That's kinda mean of him then to leave all this work to you then when he's the strongest. Laughing, Mira turned back to a table, straightening it. No, it's okay. He might be strong, but he is old so I don't mind. It used to be easier, but I guess I've gotten a little weak over the years. Shaking his head, Naruto stood up. Well, I'm definitely helping you then. I gotta do something to earn my keep. As Naruto wandered up the stairs, Murajane called out to him and made a circular motion with her hands. Nodding, Naruto disappeared for a moment before coming back down a moment later with 2 tables, one on top of the other. Mira's eyes widened in shock and started shouting something at him. Pausing, Naruto looked at her strangely and shrugged. Wonder what she's gone all crazy about. Seeing his look, Murajane composed herself before writing down what she meant. Sorry, you just took me by surprise. There aren't that many mages in the guild who have that kind of latent strength. Naruto shrugged again and smiled sheepishly while lowering the tables. Oh, well, surprise. After the initial shock, Murajane was more than happy for Naruto's help as it significantly sped things up. It still took another half an hour to get everything right. But when they finished, Mira gave Naruto a special thank you drink and several bowls of food. I'll let you finish off here then. I'll just be upstairs, so don't be afraid to ask for any help. Nodding, Naruto continued to tuck into the bowl as Murajane closed the door behind her. Naruto stretched as his body clock woke him up. It was still pitch black, but Naruto felt fully refreshed for some reason. His internal timer must have been out after sleeping 2 full days. Licking his lips, Naruto swung his legs over the edge of the bed, covering his mouth as he yawned. Standing, he made his way to the bathroom to clean out the yuck taste in his mouth and try wake himself up. He wandered out 5 minutes later feeling a little better. Stifling another yawn, he reached for his scroll but stopped. His clothes were still in the sink. Bother. Traipsing over to his gear, he sighed. Completely saturated. Pulling them out, he tried to wring them out but only managed to remove about half the water. Hanging them over the edge of a chair, Naruto had a thought. Maybe a little wind chakra would do the trick. Grinning, he slipped the soggy things on and formed the ram seal. Alright, let's try out FUNN. Fukuha Kansu no Jutsu Wind Release, Clothes Drying Technique. So alright folks, that's all for today. Stay tuned for part 2. Do subscribe, like and share for more such videos. Also check out the story and author Lanky Nathan on FANFICTIONnet. Press the bell icon to be notified first on release. See you in the next video. Till then, goodbye.